All right, so in this one, I'm going to talk about a trip I took recently to Indiana. So, one of the things I like to do periodically is actually get out to some of the areas where I'm buying notes. Now, for note buying, you don't actually have to put eyes on the property. One of the things that's kind of nice about being a note investor is you can do everything remote. But if you're doing this, as a full-time occupation or starting to do it as longer on a bigger scale, I think it makes sense sometimes to actually get your feet on the ground and visit some of these towns and visit some of these places and meet your vendors face to face. I think if you're playing a long game in the notes business, it's something that pays off. So I do these trips periodically. I don't do them real often because, you spend a lot of money doing them. You don't want to go too crazy with it, but there are certain times where it makes sense. And for me, it's typically when I have some REO properties concentrated in a certain area where it makes sense to get out there. For me, I find that my handful of REOs take up a disproportionate amount of my time. So a lot of times that's the trigger for taking a trip somewhere, in this case, Indiana. But I also like to get a lot of other things done while I'm there as well, which I'll be talking about today. So why do I do these trips overall? Well, making sure REO properties are on track is really a big one. As I mentioned, my handful of REOs take up a disproportionate amount of my time. And I found that with the REOs in particular, you never really get the full story until you're there on the ground. It always seems like I see things I wasn't aware of or learn things I didn't know about. So it's always good to be there. And it's also good for your vendors to know that you're going to show up on occasion. So that I think is very valuable. But the other thing I like to do when I'm on these trips is look for new deals. So before I go on one of these, I'll email some of my asset managers and say, hey, send me everything you have. Send me whatever you have, in this area, in this case, Indiana. And that way I can take a look at the notes that I might be interested in buying. And when I'm in those areas, I can drive by the properties, I can check out the neighborhoods, I can check out the condition of the properties. And usually I come away with some assets that I want to go and bid on. And that's really nice because now I can bid with a lot more confidence. I kind of know going in what the condition of everything is. Now, some of these properties, like on this trip too, some of these properties, you look at them and I don't even stop driving. I don't even bother to take pictures. I take one look and I'm like, oh my God, that place is a nightmare. And I just keep on going. But usually you can find a few gems in there as well. So that's really nice too when you come back. So hopefully this leads to more deals. My past trips have tended to lead to some really good note deals. And I looked at a bunch of properties on this trip. I think I looked at 15 or so altogether. And some of those I'm definitely interested in trying to buy if I can. The other thing I want to do is build up my local teams in these areas and my vendor relationships. So with note buying, it's best if you can try to concentrate in certain areas. And the reason why it's better to concentrate is you can then build teams in those areas that you can then leverage. Now, that's kind of hard to do because there are only so many notes available for sale. It's really hard to say, hey, I'm going to buy all my notes in Dayton, Ohio or Muskegon, Michigan, because you're going to have a hard time finding enough. But if you're playing a long game and doing this over time, you will naturally kind of concentrate in some areas. And so if you have a focus area and some particular realtors or contractors that you're depending on, I think it really helps build a relationship over the long term. If you can get out there and meet up with them face to face, sit down, maybe have coffee or walk through your REO properties and talk through what you're working on. And then the other thing I like to do is kind of scout areas and scout towns. So one of the things I'll always do is, look up some of the data on different cities, look at the population, see how rural it is or not, see what employers are going on in that area, look up some of the crime data to try to get an idea. And while all that's great, and you can do that remotely, there's nothing that really beats driving through a town or, getting out and walking around and seeing what's going on. Because, and on this trip in particular too, right? I mean, some areas, some towns I really, really like. They're pretty nice. Other towns I've driven through and I'm just like, ick, I don't want anything to do here. So that's really going to inform my future note buying and my bidding. I can keep track of those areas. And so now when I see notes that come up in areas that I really liked, I can bid those, or other areas and I'm like, man, that's really a depressed crap hole, to be blunt about it. I can stay away from those. And, like I said, it's really hard to get that data unless you're actually out there on the ground running around. So these trips have a lot of value from multiple perspectives, and they make sense if you're going to play a really long game. If you're just doing one or two deals, well, then it doesn't really make sense. But if you're doing it, full time and plan on doing it over many years, well, then these trips can really pay dividends over many, many years. So here's kind of the itinerary of where I went. So I had an REO in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I needed to get to. I had an REO in Muncie, Indiana, and I had another property that's probably going to be an REO before too long, all the way down in Evansville. And there were some other areas that I wanted to look at along the way, like Terre Haute. And so if you're looking at this on YouTube, I'm showing a map, but to try to describe it for the people who are just listening, basically you've got Fort Wayne up to the northeast, Evansville down to the southwest, and those cities are a couple hundred miles apart. So when I was planning this out, what I really wanted to do was either fly into Fort Wayne and work my way south, or fly into Evansville and work my way north. But that was a little tricky just because those are small airports and the flights into there are just insanely expensive. So what I ended up doing was flying into Indianapolis and then kind of zigzagging back and forth. So I flew into Indianapolis, went up to Fort Wayne, down to Muncie, back to Indianapolis to look at some properties, over to Terre Haute to kind of check out some properties and check out that city, down to Evansville to meet with the folks down there, and then back up in Indianapolis and out. So I ended up doing quite a bit of driving around. Um, so it was a pretty hectic trip. I mean, when I do these trips, I try to just kind of get in and get out. So I flew in late on a Monday night, and then my flight got delayed. So it was actually like 2 in the morning Tuesday by the time I got there. And then I flew out late on Thursday. And then as it happened, I got delayed flying out, so I didn't actually get home until like 1:30 a.m. on Friday. I think Southwest felt bad because my first flight was delayed by a couple hours, so they wanted to give me my couple hours back on the return trip or something. I don't know. But overall, covered a lot of ground. For Google Maps, covered about over 600 miles altogether. So kind of a whirlwind tour, but got a lot of good stuff done while I was there. So now I'll go through and talk about, some of the specific things I was doing and what I learned. The first real stop was in Fort Wayne, where I have an REO. Um, this one has really been a problem. I'll do a case study on this at some point in the future once I get it disposed of. This was an issue where the servicer was supposed to be doing checks on this on a quarterly basis, and it turns out they weren't. And actually, my assistant Sarah was going through the area a few months ago, and we found out that there was actually a lake in the basement. I mean, the basement had literally like 5 or 6 feet of water. It was up to the top of the stairs. And when I flew out, I had a guy working on getting it drained, and then I also had to uh, meet up with the realtor. So got a really good referral for realtor from Dickie Baldwin. Met up with him, and kind of the issue with this one with the lake in the basement is there's a big issue with the foundation. The whole one foundation wall is hosed, and then the other thing that I saw, which I didn't know about before I was out there, was the driveway. The side driveway is sloped so that it's actually funneling rainwater right into the basement. So that's why I had a lake. So the game plan with this one is to get the water out of the basement so buyers can actually go and see the whole basement, and then get it sold quickly because it's going to fill back up with water and this is going to be nasty when we get into the wintertime. And so when we're listing this, we're obviously fully disclosing all the issues with the foundation. So we'll be selling this to a local investor who wants to fix it up and flip it, or possibly turn it into a rental. It's actually a pretty decent rental area, but we just wanted to get the water out so they could see exactly what they're dealing with, and then get it sold off to them so they can start tackling that before we get too far into the winter. Also had issue with vandalism. That was actually where I first got alerted that there was an issue with this property. There was some attempted copper theft here as well. So one of the walls got banged up where they tried to steal some of the copper, but it was a pretty lame attempt. They didn't actually get any of it, so that was good, at least. Definitely a problem property, one I'm just looking to get rid of. And like I said, I'll do a more in-depth case study on this at some point down the road once I actually get this disposed of and get the final numbers. This was a note that I bought as part of a package of 5 or 6 notes last year, and it was vacant when I bought it. Normally, I try to shy away from vacant properties, but it kind of made the numbers made sense on its own. And this was being serviced by a quote unquote full service servicer who handles everything in the property management. And I didn't mind doing it because it looked like everything was under control and the servicer was inspecting it on a quarterly basis. Well, I'm not going to bore you with all the details right now because I'll do a special video on this at some point down the road, but the servicer completely hosed me. They were not doing what they needed to do to dispose of the REO, and they were also not checking up on it. So I didn't find out about I had vandalism until the city called. I didn't find out about a lake in the basement until my assistant Sarah went out there to check it out. So hopefully bring this one to a decent conclusion. But yeah, lots of good lessons learned here, and definitely one that I want to go and get my eyeballs on and work with the realtor to get this thing disposed of promptly. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm showing some pictures of here too. This was a picture of the basement where I had a few feet of the water drained. We didn't quite have it all the way drained yet by the time I was out there. And if you do want these pictures, because I'll show some other pictures on the YouTube, just drop me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com, and I can send you a picture of the pictures of the slide deck that I'm using. The one weird surprise was there's a computer sitting in the living room. So I have a free Dell computer running Windows XP. God knows what's on it. I just kind of left it there. It's weird the things that people leave behind when you have vacant properties. Okay, so from there I headed down to Muncie, Indiana. I have a handful of properties in Muncie. Muncie's known for being the home of Ball State University. It also used to be the home of Ball Corporation, which builds aluminum cans and spaceships, which I actually used to work for. And back in the 90s, they had moved the corporate headquarters. Used to be in Muncie, moved it actually out to Colorado, where I am now and where I work there. Kind of a medium-sized town, hour or so outside of Indianapolis. So in one way, it's a smaller market, but it's actually got a kind of decent critical mass, decent downtown area, and a lot of good things going for it with the university. There's another area where I've had my big problem REO, and one that I will be doing a case study on in the future once I close that out. But I mentioned I did have multiple properties, so there was one that I drove by first where it's actually coming up for foreclosure auction here in the beginning of October. So I'm not sure when I'm releasing this podcast, but that foreclosure auction might actually be done by the time you're listening to this. But whenever I have a foreclosure auction coming, I want to keep my eye on the property and see, if the borrowers have vacated. Sometimes they do that. If they do, I want to make sure I get things secured right away. In this case, the property actually looked like it was in good shape. They've been maintaining it. Borrowers were definitely home, so that's a good thing. I always get kind of concerned with these because I worry about them just leaving and not knowing what kind of state they're going to leave it in. So I also have my realtor in the area. I have a really good realtor in Muncie now, bird dogging this one as well. But then the other property that I wanted to get to is my main REO. So this was one that actually went to foreclosure at the end of last year. And then we ended up getting it back and getting inside, found out that it was a full-on hoarder house. And so when I got this thing back, there was trash basically waist deep throughout the entire 1,800 square feet. And I ended up when I got this cleaned out, I ended up just finding a crew on Craigslist out of Indianapolis who came up and really kicked butt on it. And then I rented the dumpsters myself. That's one way you can kind of save money on a clean out. But I had to rent four 40-yard dumpsters, and the 40-yard dumpsters are the biggest ones that you can get. And that is a phenomenal amount of junk. They left lawnmowers, they left a boat. It was kind of crazy, and I've got some before and after pictures here that I'm showing. So this one, when I got it back, it was so messed up that if I just sold it as is, which is kind of what I normally just want to do with an REO. Normally when I get REOs back, I just want to dispose of them right away. And assuming I bought correctly, that's not a problem. I can make a good profit doing that. But this one was so messed up and repugnant that I was going to take a beating if I did that. So I ended up taking on the rehab work, which I don't normally do, but I did it here. So I wanted to, and that work is basically done now. At this point, I'll be putting it on the market here in the next week or so. So I wanted to check that out. And it's very interesting looking at the photos of the before and after. It's like night and day. I mean, you would never know that this was a hoarder house now. Inside the kitchen, I mean, there was just trash piled everywhere. And now you actually got this nice brand new kitchen. And, when I rehabbed it, I didn't go crazy with the rehabs. You got kind of, basic appliances, basic kitchen cabinetry and whatnot, but it's nice, very livable. And what's really great about the neighborhood too, where this is, it's fairly close to the university. It's a really good rental place. And right now, there's just not a lot for sale in the market. So, hoping to do okay when I actually go and sell this. But yeah, I mean, in the living room, they left a Christmas tree and a cello, and it was pretty nuts. I mean, some areas you couldn't even see the floors in these things. And like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm showing some pictures of this stuff. But if you want to see the pictures afterwards, just drop me an email, dan@fusionnotes.com, and I'll send you to them. But some of them are kind of hard to believe. I mean, some of these are glad I didn't find any dead bodies under all of the trash. It was pretty gross overall. But now it's actually a very nice house, and it's in a really good neighborhood, big corner lot. Kind of excited about this one now. And then from Muncie, I actually went through Terre Haute to check that out. They've got another university over there. Terre Haute was more hit or miss. I did find some properties that were kind of nice, but there were some others that were just not that great. Then made the drive down to Evansville. Evansville I liked a lot. I had never been to Evansville before. I thought it was a very nice town, has a really nice riverfront area. A lot of employers. As you drive into town from the north, there's a big Toyota plant. There's a number of different employers up there. Seems like there's a lot going on. So wanted to check out this one property that we've kind of started the forfeiture process, haven't filed a complaint. And actually where this was right at the time I was driving through, this was a note that was very, very delinquent. Tried to reach out to the borrowers, couldn't get much response. So started the forfeiture process. And then right when we were about to file the complaint, the borrowers kind of came back online and say, hey, we want to make a down payment and get this reinstated and do a forbearance plan, which is great, but I'm always suspicious when they wait until that very late date to come online. And what I'm worried about in this case is I don't want the borrower just to use that as a stall tactic, so I don't want to stop my legal process until the borrower has actually made some sort of good faith down payment and put skin in the game. So I wanted to get down to Evansville to put eyes on the property, which is actually in very good shape. Looks really nice. And then sit down with the realtor that I found in that area. So I was able to sit down at a coffee shop with the realtor and talk through things. He gave me a lot of really good information on the town. And what's really great too is, and this is something I'll talk about more in the future too, is you want to find a realtor who is used to dealing with REOs and foreclosures because it's kind of a specialized thing, right? Some realtors don't know what it is. Some realtors just don't want anything to do with that part of the business, which is totally reasonable. Other realtors like to specialize this, and I found a really good one who specialized this. We were able to sit down at this really nice coffee shop in town. I'm a big coffee guy, so I enjoyed doing that. Um, so I feel like I'm in really good shape if I do have to take this one back, because I feel like I have the right team on the ground. He's also got vendors who can get it secured, and the property is in good shape, so I don't mind taking it back. However, since then, at the end of the week, right after I rolled through there, the borrower actually did come through with a $2,000 down payment, which is really awesome. So I'll have to see what we can get going on this one. Hopefully, I don't end up having to take it back, but if I do, I'm feeling good about it. But yeah, and then checked out, their waterfront area, downtown area is really nice. And if you get there and you like coffee, I recommend checking out the Penny Lane Coffee House. That was kind of a nice spot. It's another thing I like to take notes on. Um, so from there, drove back up to Indianapolis, which is like a 3 hour drive of nothing. There's really nothing between Evansville and Indiana, which kind of surprised me. But overall, good trip. Flight delays were kind of annoying, but that's just the way it goes sometime. But yeah, if you do start doing more note investing or you start getting a critical mass in some area, really recommend at some point either take a drive out or a flight out, check out the area, meet your vendors, actually get to know the neighborhoods, get to know the towns. I think it's something that really helps out overall. So that's what I got for you on this one. I will see you next time.